unlucky guy in the world. You know why?
Why's that?
You've had 2 girlfriends that have gone missing, and the last person they were seen with is you? That's pretty unlucky, isn't it?
I mean, I think that's extremely unlucky.
You must be the most unlucky guy in the world. That's what a prosecutor said to him, on the stand, in front of a jury. And she wasn't wrong, because this is a man who had 2 girlfriends vanish. 2, 10 years apart, and in both cases, he was the last person seen with them. April 2017. South of Kansas City, Missouri. A man is walking through the woods, hunting for mushrooms. He's not thinking about anything except the ground in front of him. And then something stops him cold. It's not a rock. It's not an animal. It's a bone. A human bone. The next day, investigators come back. 20 yards away, in the same patch of dirt, they find a second set of remains. 2 women, buried in the exact same stretch of woods. 2 women who disappeared 10 years apart from each other. And the man responsible? He hadn't exactly kept it a secret. For over a decade, he told people, his girlfriends, his cellmates, his own mother, on a recorded jailhouse phone call. He told anyone who would listen that he'd done it. And for over a decade, nobody could prove a single word of it. No bodies, no crime scene, no cause of death. Just a small Missouri town, 2 grieving families, and a man walking free between confessions. If you're new here, this is where we dig into real cases like this one. The disappearances, the cover-ups, the moment everything finally cracks open. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. And hit subscribe if you're into true crime that actually gets into the details. Because to understand how 2 women ended up buried in the same stretch of woods, we have to go back. Back to May 2007. Back to a small town called Belton. And a 17-year-old girl named Kara Kopetsky. Belton, Missouri sits just south of Kansas City. It's the kind of town where every kid goes to the same high school. Every parent knows every other parent from the bleachers at Friday night football. And everybody's business is, eventually, everybody's business. It's not a big place. It doesn't need to be. It's the kind of town where people stay, where roots run deep, where missing girl isn't a headline. It's a gut punch to the entire community. In 2007, that's where Kara Kopetsky was growing up. She was 17. And by every single account from the people who loved her, she was a firecracker. Funny, blunt, the kind of friend you called when you wanted the truth, not the softened-up version of it. She didn't sugarcoat anything, and people respected her for it. But underneath the confidence, she was also just a normal teenage girl. She second-guessed herself constantly. She changed her hairstyle every few weeks like most girls that age do, trying on different versions of who she wanted to be. She lived glued to her phone with friends she'd literally just seen at school a few hours earlier, because that's just what being 17 looks like. Her mom, Rhonda, used to laugh about how her phone bill ran 40 pages long every single month. Her bedroom door stayed shut most of the time, typical teenager stuff. And if she ever locked herself out of her own room, she'd just climb back in through the window. It had become something of a running joke in the family. Nobody thought twice about it. May 4th, 2007. A Friday. Kara went to school like any other day. Nothing unusual. She had a free period right after 9 a.m. And like she'd done plenty of times before, she stepped outside the building for a bit. But this time, she didn't come back. She missed her next class. And when she didn't show up for her shift at Popeye's later that afternoon, that's when people started to worry. Fast. By just after 5 p.m., her family had already called the police. When investigators went into her bedroom, almost everything was exactly where it should be. Her makeup, her clothes, her iPod, a pack of cigarettes sitting on the dresser, the flat iron she used every single morning without fail. Her phone was there too. But the one thing that was missing, the one thing that never left her side, was her Motorola RAZR, the phone she practically lived on, the one she'd apparently walked out the door with that morning. And it hadn't been used since 9:20 that morning. Investigators pulled surveillance footage from Belton High School, and there she was, Kara Kopetsky, walking out the door at 9:19 a.m. That was the last time anyone ever saw her on camera. She had a full few days planned out ahead of her, hanging out with friends, picking up a paycheck, A job interview at a Quick Trip that she was excited about. She didn't show up to any of it. No calls. No texts. Nothing. A girl who lived on her phone had gone completely, terrifyingly silent. Now here's something strange about the timing of all this. May 4th, 2007 was also the exact day a devastating tornado tore through Greensburg, Kansas, just a few hours away. It leveled almost the entire town. Local news crews were stretched painfully thin, and some outlets barely had the bandwidth to even cover the disappearance of a teenage girl in a small Missouri town. But Belton didn't wait around for the media to catch up. Kara's photo went up everywhere. MySpace, telephone poles, every storefront window in town. Groups of people combed the streets day and night, refusing to let this fade into the background the way so many missing persons cases quietly do. Within days, tips started flooding in. Over 400 of them, eventually, along with more than 100 alleged sightings. People swore they'd seen her in Florida, in California, on a plane somewhere, even on a tram at Disney World. None of it led anywhere, but detectives didn't have to look far to find someone worth a very hard second look. Kara's ex-boyfriend. His name was Yust, 18 years old. He and Kara had dated for about 9 months before she ended things. On paper, it seemed like it should have worked. They liked the same music, the same style. He was the charming one, the lead singer in a local band, a year older than her, effortlessly cool in the way that turns heads in a small town. But somewhere along the way, Kara's parents started noticing something shifting in their daughter. She got quieter, smaller somehow, less like herself the longer that relationship dragged on. And here's where it gets uncomfortable, because Kara actually left behind a warning, in her own words, before any of this happened. On April 24th, just over a week before she vanished, Kara posted something online that reads, in hindsight, like a flare shot into the sky. She wrote that life had been great lately, that she'd spent the last 9 months completely wrapped up in Kyler, that somewhere in the middle of all of it, she'd stopped making time for her friends, for her family, and had lost track of who she even was underneath it all. She said she was trying to find that person again. For days later, on April 28th, things escalated in a way that should stop you cold. Kara told Belton police that as she was leaving work, Kyler forced her into his car and wouldn't let her out until they were miles from where they started. She filed for an order of protection. It was formally served to him on May 1st. In that filing, Kara didn't hold anything back. She said he had restrained her, physically assaulted her. She wrote, in her own words, that she didn't know what he'd do next, because the abuse had only been getting worse. 3 days after that protective order was served to Yust, Kara Kopetsky was gone. If you're watching this right now, take a second and drop where you're tuning in from, and what time it is where you are. It's genuinely wild to think about how many different time zones are hearing this story unfold at the exact same moment. Now here's the thing. When detectives sat down with Kyler, his story was that he'd missed a call from Kara on the morning of May 4th, somewhere around 11 a.m. He said he tried calling back, but she never picked up. He told them he'd spent the day at his grandfather's house, and later at band practice. He hadn't seen her at all, he claimed. He talked about how many photos he still had of her saved on his phone, how badly he wanted her to come back to him. Yeah, he admitted, things had ended badly. Maybe he hadn't handled it right, but he insisted he was just worried about her. He even brought up comments Kara had supposedly made about wanting to run off to Mexico if she ever got into serious trouble at home. He painted her as the type to live in the moment, someone who didn't think about consequences. He told police, flatly, that he had no idea where she was. But Kara's actual phone records told an entirely different story than the one he'd handed investigators. She had called Kyler at 9:13 that morning. He called her back at 9:20, just 1 minute after she was seen walking out of Belton High School on that surveillance camera. That overlap, that gap between her last confirmed sighting and his callback, that was exactly the kind of detail investigators simply could not ignore. About a month later, on June 2nd, a completely separate case broke just 30 minutes away in Overland Park, and it pulled national attention toward the entire region. 18-year-old Kelsey Smith was abducted in broad daylight from a department store. Police quickly confirmed her case, and Kara's weren't connected. But for a stretch of time, This quiet corner of Missouri and Kansas found itself under a media spotlight for all the worst possible reasons. For days after Kelsey vanished, her body was found, and her killer was arrested that same day. For Kara's mother, Rhonda, watching another family get answers, even devastating ones, while she got nothing, was its own unique kind of torture. She said you hold onto the hope that your daughter is still out there somewhere, that maybe she's being held, that there's still some version of this where you get her back alive. Weeks became months. Months became years. And as for Kyler, he never really left the radar of investigators. Drug charges, traffic violations, assault. He was estranged from most of his family, diagnosed with bipolar disorder and PTSD, carrying a long history of substance abuse behind him. He'd started using cocaine at 14, heroin at 16. Investigators brought him in for questioning multiple separate times, pressing him again and again on that phone record discrepancy. He never gave them anything solid. He admitted to forcing Kara into his car that day in April. He admitted to grabbing her during arguments. But on the one question that actually mattered, where she was, he stayed a locked door. Over the following years, a pattern started to take shape. A pattern that had nothing to do with physical evidence, and everything to do with Kyler's own mouth. Multiple people, including a former girlfriend and one of his own bandmates, came forward independently to tell police that Kyler had admitted, in plain, unmistakable terms, to killing Kara. The FBI got involved. They asked his then-girlfriend to wear a wire, hoping she could get him talking on tape. She tried hard, but Kyler was cagey about it, almost theatrical, talking in circles about spirits and energy, claiming he could feel Kara's hand on his shoulder from beyond. It was evasive, strange, and frustratingly, still not enough to build an actual case on. Each Mother's Day got harder for Rhonda. Each anniversary brought another search, another walk, another round of flyers. 8 searches came and went. For years became a milestone nobody wanted to reach. Meanwhile, just a month after Kara disappeared, another family had lived through their own nightmare and come out the other side with answers. Kelsey Smith's family. Her killer, Edwin Hall, pled guilty to kidnapping, rape, and murder, and was sentenced to life in prison. Rhonda watched that resolution happen for a stranger while her own daughter's case sat frozen, and there is a particular kind of grief in that. Envy braided together with grief. Wanting so badly for someone else's nightmare to end, while yours refuses to. In 2011, 4 years after Kara vanished, a different girlfriend of Kyler's, 6 months pregnant at the time, filed her own protection order against him. She said he had physically assaulted her repeatedly, to the point of nearly causing her to pass out. She said he had harmed or killed her pets. And she said directly that he had told her he'd killed people before. Ex-girlfriends, he apparently claimed, out of jealousy. Those words eventually led to a guilty plea for choking and striking that same girlfriend. According to her mother, Kyler had drawn a pentagram on the woman's forehead and warned her he'd seen bodies hidden in barrels of acid or fed to pigs so they'd disappear entirely. He was charged with animal cruelty on top of everything else and placed on probation for 2 years. From there, his record just kept growing. Arrested for stealing tattoo supplies, more traffic violations, then drug trafficking. In November 2013, he was sentenced to 45 months in prison on those trafficking charges. While locked up, he allegedly confessed yet again, this time to a cellmate, that he had killed Kara. In April 2016, Kyler Yust walked out of prison after serving most of his sentence. Nearly 10 years had passed since Kara Kopetsky disappeared from that school parking lot, and almost immediately, the entire area braced for something horribly, unmistakably familiar, because 5 months later, on September 8, 2016, barely 5 months after Kyler's release, and just 10 minutes from where Kara had vanished nearly a decade earlier, 21-year-old Jessica Runions was out at a party with friends. Jessica worked as a pastry chef at a senior living community, and had recently been promoted to manager, something she was genuinely, visibly proud of. She was hoping to go back to school for journalism. Her parents described her as hardworking and fiercely family-oriented, especially close with her 2 younger sisters. Her mom said the family group chat never stopped buzzing. Photos, updates, check-ins, multiple times a day. Like clockwork. the way close families run. So when Jessica didn't come home that night and her phone went straight to voicemail, her family didn't wait long to sound the alarm. Police were called within a couple of hours. At 2 a.m., Jessica's car was found burned out in a wooded area, miles from anywhere. Jessica herself was nowhere to be found. The next day, she missed a follow-up doctor's appointment for a recent surgery, an appointment she never, under any circumstances, would have skipped. Her father, John, put it about as simply as it can be put. This wasn't a girl who ran off. She loved her job, her friends, her family. There was no trace, no word, nothing. Witnesses at the party said Jessica had left with someone they recognized, now 28 years old, out of prison for less than half a year. Kyler Yust. He'd reportedly been at the party to give a ride home to a friend of Jessica's boyfriend. People there said he'd been drinking heavily that night, agitated, on edge. Then came the detail that changed absolutely everything. Kyler's own half-brother, Jessup, told police he had personally watched Kyler set Jessica's car on fire. Jessup said Kyler had told him directly that he had killed Jessica and left her body somewhere in the woods. When police finally caught up with Kyler, his face was covered in burns. He claimed he'd been too drunk to remember much of anything, only that he'd ended up at his grandfather's place afterward. When officers searched the trailer where he'd been staying, they found it in complete chaos: weapons, pills, food that had been sitting out for weeks. He was arrested and charged with knowingly burning a vehicle. Jessup cooperated fully with investigators, even speaking to local media about both Kara and Jessica, saying all he wanted was justice for both families. He wanted Kyler gone, for good this time. Kyler was held on a $50,000 cash bond, with his arson trial set for the fall of 2017. Jessup, meanwhile, ended up in legal trouble of his own, traffic violations, and later an arson charge tied to a separate house fire. By now, 7 separate people had come forward over the years, each independently saying Kyler had confessed to killing both Kara and Jessica. And still, without bodies, without hard physical evidence, police did not have enough to charge him with murder. Lieutenant Brad Swanson put it about as plainly as a cop can. They'd ruled out a lot of people over the years chasing this case. They had never once been able to rule out Kyler. Jessica's mother, Jamie, had never even heard the name Kyler Yust before her daughter vanished. When she started looking into his history and found Kara's unsolved case attached to his name, she reached out to Rhonda directly. 2 mothers, a decade apart, bound now by the exact same nightmare. They started comparing notes, swapping every scrap of detail they had, searching together in a way neither of them could have imagined when this all began. The search for Jessica became just as relentless as the search for Kara had been years before. Search crews met on weekends, week after week. ATVs, maps taped up across an entire hallway of her father's house, worked through section by section, inch by inch. As he put it, a loved one doesn't just disappear. She didn't choose to miss the holidays with her family. Weeks turned into months. 6 months came and went with no answers. If this is the kind of story that pulls you in, the slow burn, the decade-long chase, the moment justice finally starts closing in, make sure you're subscribed, because we cover cases exactly like this one every single week. In April 2017, the case broke wide open, not because of a task force, not because of a tip line ringing off the hook, because of pure chance. In that rural, wooded area south of Kansas City, a man was out foraging for mushrooms when something in the dirt caught his eye. It didn't look like animal bone. Trusting his gut, he called it in. He was right. They were human remains. The next day, investigators found a second set of remains roughly 20 yards away. The medical examiner's office was able to quickly confirm that some of the remains belonged to Jessica Runions. The second set had clearly been there much, much longer. It would take more time and testing to confirm what everyone already quietly suspected. Rhonda said the waiting was the hardest part of the entire 10 years. But in her heart, she already knew. It was Kara. The identification came back. It was confirmed. After a full decade, Kara Kopetsky had finally been found. What had started as one missing girl, then two, was now officially a double murder investigation. Rhonda said it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. She said she'd spent years being Kara's voice, and now she and Jamie would be Jessica's voice too, making sure both girls were heard, loud and clear, together. Kyler Yust was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of abandonment of a corpse. He pleaded not guilty. For years, Kara's family had held walks and made signs just to keep the tips coming in, just to remind the world she was still missing. Now, finally, there was a resolution to hold on to. One mother said it best. The heaviness had been lifted. There was, finally, a lightness in the air. Kara's remains had been found close to Jessica's bones. 2 mothers, bound by unimaginable loss, leaning on each other in a way no one should ever have to learn how to do. The prosecution had a strong case lined up, and a key piece of it was Jessup, Kyler's own half-brother, the one who'd claimed to witness the car burning, the one who said he'd heard Kyler confess to strangling Jessica with his own hands. But before the case ever reached trial, everything changed again. Jessup took his own life while in jail. Losing him gutted a major part of the prosecution's testimony overnight. Then the pandemic hit, delaying the trial even further. Kyler's attorneys filed motions arguing the pandemic had crippled their ability to prepare a defense, pushing the process back again and again and again. Finally, in April 2021, both cases, Kara's and Jessica's, were combined into a single trial. The jury heard opening arguments. Kyler Yust, facing 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Kara Kopetsky and Jessica Runions. Prosecutors reminded the jury that back in 2011, the FBI had recorded Yust essentially confessing to how he killed Kara, saying he'd strangled her and thrown her body into the woods. They pointed to a tattoo on his neck that he'd told people symbolized his own hands wrapped around her throat. Prosecutors said he'd also confessed to killing Jessica, this time to his own mother, during a recorded call from jail. Kyler, ever confident, insisted on taking the stand himself. His defense argued police had botched the entire investigation from the start, failed to follow up on leads, that there was no physical evidence tying him to either murder. Somehow, his attorneys argued, he had pulled off 2 separate murders without leaving a single trace behind. And with Jessup no longer alive to speak for himself, Kyler's own defense pointed the finger squarely at his dead half-brother, painting Jessup as the real killer in both cases. The prosecution wasn't having any of it. They called Kyler obsessive, jealous, controlling. They reminded the jury that across more than a decade of alleged confessions, at least 7 of them, to 7 completely different people, Kyler had never once mentioned his brother's name. Not once. The only name that ever came up in any of those confessions was his own. The motive, prosecutors argued, was almost painfully simple. Kara didn't want him anymore, and that wasn't something he could live with accepting. With Jessica, the details were murkier. Some said she'd been dating a friend of his. Others said they'd dated in the past themselves, but the through line stayed exactly the same. If he couldn't have someone, no one could. Prosecutors played a recorded jailhouse call Kyler had made to his mother, where he'd said something that landed like ice water in the courtroom. That this was happening all over again, worse than before, and that he might as well be famous now, since he had nothing left to lose. The cross-examination is where things got genuinely tense. The prosecutor pressed him hard. She reminded him he'd had 2 girlfriends go missing, and that he was the last person seen with both of them. She called it unlucky. He agreed it was extremely unlucky, but tried to flip it, saying anyone with a brother who turned out to be a serial killer would call themselves unlucky too. She reminded him that the only reason his story even worked was because Jessup wasn't alive to contradict it. She asked him, point blank, if it wasn't awfully convenient that his brother had died before ever having to answer for any of it. He said nothing about the situation felt convenient to him. She reminded the jury he'd been the target of this investigation for almost 14 years. She brought up how, the night he was finally pulled over and arrested, he'd been so frightened he'd wet himself, a detail he hadn't invented, and one multiple witnesses had already confirmed on the stand. Then she asked him something that landed like a gut punch in that courtroom. If burning himself while torching Jessica's car had hurt. He admitted that it had. She asked him what else might hurt. Having the life strangled out of you, maybe. He agreed that was probably true, too. She asked him flatly if he'd rather sit in jail charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder than simply tell investigators, 14 years earlier, that his brother was supposedly the one responsible. His answer was that he knew he'd be blamed either way, and that he was waiting for his moment to tell his truth. Right there, on the stand, in front of the jury, she asked him why he'd waited until his own murder trial to finally share that truth. Without a confirmed cause of death for either woman, a first-degree murder conviction was always going to be an uphill fight for the prosecution, and everyone in that courtroom seemed to sense it. When the verdict finally came in, it landed as a strange, complicated mix of relief and disappointment, all at once. Guilty, but of voluntary manslaughter in Kara's case, and second-degree murder in Jessica's. Rhonda, through tears, said she didn't feel like real justice had been served for her daughter. She told Kara, simply, that she had tried. The judge sided with the jury's sentencing recommendation, the maximum allowed on both counts. Life in prison for second-degree murder. 15 years for voluntary manslaughter. Under Missouri law, a life sentence calculates out to 30 years, and the sentences were ordered to run consecutively. 45 years total. In 2023, the Missouri Court of Appeals upheld the conviction in full. Looking back across the full decade between Kara's disappearance and Jessica's murder, there's one thing that's genuinely hard to ignore. How many chances the system had to stop Kyler Yust, and how many times it simply didn't. This wasn't a man who hid his violence well. Over those 10 years, he was arrested again and again. Drug charges, assault, animal cruelty, traffic violations stacked on top of each other, and time after time, he walked away with probation instead of any real consequence. At least 7 separate people told police, independently of each other, that he confessed to killing Kara. Some of those confessions came years before Jessica was ever in any danger at all. He talked about it in jailhouse phone calls, to cellmates, to girlfriends, almost like some part of him wanted to be caught, or wanted people to simply know. And still, without a body, without physical evidence, there wasn't enough on paper to charge him. It raises an uncomfortable question that's genuinely hard to shake once it settles in. If that one man hadn't gone out looking for mushrooms in April of 2017, would Kara and Jessica ever have been found at all? Would Kyler Yust have ever faced a courtroom for either one of them? For Rhonda and Jamie, the two mothers, this tragedy created a bond that neither of them ever wanted, but that both of them now describe as family. Jamie said she believes something bigger brought them together, that neither of them would have survived this without the other standing beside them. Kara's father lost 20 pounds in the aftermath, throwing himself into work just to keep his mind occupied and his eyes from filling up. Her younger brother, Thomas, was only 8 years old when she disappeared. For years afterward, he'd sit for hours in her old bedroom, the same room she used to joke he wasn't allowed in. Jessica's sister, Morgan, said the hardest part was a very specific kind of empty. The kind that comes from losing the one person who used to walk through life right beside you, the one who made the bad days bearable, and who never once let her stay sad for very long. Thomas still remembers the small things. A summer afternoon, Kara soaked him with a water bottle, and he got her back with a handful of ice, the two of them dissolving into laughter over absolutely nothing. He says there's no one left to splash him with water now. Morgan says she lost more than a sister that day. She lost her best friend, her protector, the person who could make her laugh until she genuinely couldn't breathe. She still tells Jessica she loves her out loud, still ending it exactly the way they always did between the two of them. Say it back. Kara Kopetsky was 17. Funny, headstrong, still figuring out exactly who she wanted to become. Jessica Runions was 21, working toward a future in journalism, showing up for the people she loved without fail, every single day. 10 years and 10 miles apart, two young women had their entire futures taken from them by the same man. And it took a total stranger, out looking for mushrooms in the woods, to finally bring them home. They are remembered not for how they died, but for exactly who they were before any of this ever happened. Daughters, sisters, friends, people who left a mark on everyone around them that 4 decades in a prison cell could never, ever undo. Before you go, we want to know what you'd have done in Rhonda or Jamie's position, waiting years for answers that never seem to come. Let us know in the comments below. And if this case moved you the way it moved us putting it together, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we bring you real cases like this one every single week. Thank you for watching and for helping keep Kara and Jessica's story alive.